Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's our pleasure to have you with us today with the new session with the HR Leaders Group. Today we have the pleasure to invite Mr. Colin Brown, founder of Happy Sandpit, and he will introduce himself later. Okay, but we have been discussing that for a long time. We wanted him to invite him to talk to us, because he has very nice concepts regarding the culture and how can you nurture the culture and create great culture. Okay, so it's our pleasure to have you with us today and how to create and extend culture in the virtual world. These meetings come to you from HR Leaders Kuwait, HR Excellence Club, and Qatar School Middle East, Tanmiyah Group, and Quality and Excellence Middle East Group. Okay, so it's our pleasure to have Mr. Colin with us today, and I will leave the floor to him to introduce himself first, and then we go for the presentation, and hopefully it will be a great one as usual. Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Colin. Please.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for making the time to come this evening. I apologize for the gloomy light. It's nighttime here, of course, and I've got my children at home and it's very loud out there. So I thought I'd better lock myself in a smaller room, but the light's a little bit darker in here, but hopefully you can see the best side of me. I can do this a bit. So thank you. My name is Colin Brown. I'm the founder of Happy Sandpit, which is a South African based organization. And we do a lot of work in the areas of culture, employee engagement, and leadership. The company Happy Sandpit was named after my book, How to Build a Happy Sandpit, which I researched and wrote a few years back, looking at the culture of South African organizations. South Africa being an interesting microcosm of the world, if you like, in as much as we have very significant socioeconomic problems here. We have the widest Gini coefficient in the entire world. That's a gap between the rich and the poor. And the conditions, therefore, here with a challenged economy and a precarious political situation and so on, mean that driving engagement and creating culture become increasingly important. When I first went out to research my book, I initially thought that, as many of us I think might do, that many of the best ideas might come from somewhere else in the world, the UK, the United States, Australia, countries that tend to talk about this stuff a lot. But what I learned, to my great delight, was that South African organizations are incredibly innovative. And I think it's because they've had to be. It's because the challenges we face are so great, we can't overlook them. We can't simply say, well, you know what, it's a job, do your job, get on with it. We have to find ways to motivate and create higher levels of engagement within our organizations. And so we've done a range of wonderful things around hiring and hiring practices, around the implementation of core values and how those get socialized throughout the organization, and so on and so on. I'm going to share a brief presentation with you. There are quite a lot of slides here, but we'll go through them quite quickly. So I won't keep you going and going and going. But the topic today, how to create and extend culture in a virtual world, is one that has fascinated me, as I think it's fascinated so many people since the pandemic. Because we've clearly got a different animal on our hands now. There's a whole range of different things going on. We're challenged in different ways as employees and as leaders rather, and employees are challenged in their own ways. And I don't think we've quite come to grips with all of this. And so we've been doing a lot of research on this topic, and I'm going to share some of that with you. But I want to just take you forward a little bit into the initial thinking, because I think some of this stuff actually plays out really well in terms of what's happening now in the world versus what used to be. What you see, this Venn diagram on the screen now, and I take it everybody can see the screen. Dr. Mohammed, can you see the Venn diagram? Am I sharing my presentation correctly? I think so. So let me just take you back a little bit. I went out to research this book back at the beginning at the end of 2012. It was 13, and that went through to the second edition in 2015. And the research as we did it then continues today. And we were asking certain questions. We were saying that all organizations are challenged by people, challenged by their people policies, challenged by getting engagement out of people. And by engagement, we simply mean an engaged employee is somebody who likes what they do and they like where they do it, and they like who they do it for, and they like who they do it with. And they think that it's a good use of their time. They're giving up a day of their time to come into work, and they think the trade-off is good because they like the fact that they're the ones doing it. And ideally, when they look around their organization, they go, thank goodness we're doing this, because if it wasn't us, it would be somebody else, and they wouldn't do it as well as us. And so that's the nirvana, right? That's the thing we're aiming for. That's the perfect metric. And it's hard to achieve, of course. But when I went out and I came back with 1 million words of transcribed information, and I had to put that down into 60,000 words to get into a book, and that meant looking for the big threads, the big commonalities between organizations. And it turned out that there were these 5 things. Now, these aren't the only 5 things that drive engagement inside organizations, but these 5 stood out as the ones that were most common. And they're not in any particular order of importance, by the way. They're all equally important, but they drive each other. The first one was the willingness to extend trust. And very simply, this is a matter of, you've got a group of employees. Hopefully you've hired intelligent ones. I'm sure you have. Hopefully you think they're super smart. I'm just trying to get something off my screen here. And hopefully you think, no, it's not really worked. I can't get that off my screen. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So hopefully you think they're super smart and that they have been worthy of being employed, and that you've done the due diligence and all of those sorts of things in order to get them in your employ. And in so doing, you have therefore hired a group of people who are worthy of trust. But trust is hard to come by. It's hard to know where to start. It's hard to know where to bring it. We have found that organizations that were typically better at this have done better through the pandemic at managing through remote work. But it's a complex matter, this. But those organizations that are naturally based on trust are ones that naturally perceive that people are good and that they're worthy of and that they're able to do good work autonomously. And that doesn't mean that they don't get managed, and that doesn't mean that we don't consider what they do and look after them and watch over them and have checkups and do all of those sorts of things. It also doesn't mean, by the way, that we don't have processes or policies. We do. Of course, I mean, I have small children. I'm a big believer in rules. I think rules are made to be followed. But I think we sometimes have altogether too many crazy rules. And I think sometimes we should think about that a little bit more. If it's possible, I would urge you to do an annual audit of your policies and processes and just see what's still relevant. And particularly now, as we emerge into a remote world, a hybrid world, maybe that's something that we really ought to think about more. We think that in a lot of organizations, there's kind of a ratio which goes around 97-3, that we write rules to protect ourselves against the 3% of people who might mess us around, and we handcuff the 97% who are never going to do it, even without the rule. And there's lots of things that go with that. Very often, it's simply a failure of line management, that managers aren't good at managing, and so they just kick things upstairs to HR where they have a problem with a person, and even though it's only one person, we write a rule for everybody. So this is something to reverse engineer, but if you can get this stuff right, you get much closer to that engaged employee. The second thing is what we call a taste for adult conversations. And essentially this is about becoming a learning organization more than being a teaching organization. It's about accepting that people generally have points of view, they have things to add, they have comments and suggestions and opinions that are worth listening to. And we very often, if we have the philosophical will to listen, which frankly is very often missing, what we're usually lacking is a metaphor, a mechanism rather, some way in which we can actually get to those voices in the organization. Now, there's something really rich about this, because the truth is most organizations don't know what they already know. Within the heads of the people who work in your organization, and as you get bigger, this only becomes more true, you have lots and lots of experience, lots of diverse experience, lots of different types of education, lots of backgrounds, lots of interests. There's lots of things that people can contribute. And when we're looking for to solve a challenge or a problem inside our organization, and we're stumped about what to do, we very often narrow the field of intelligence, that small group at the top of the organization, totally forgetting the fact that the organization is rich with ideas. And if we're able to get to them, and we talk about adult conversations here, this is viewing employees not just as strata in the organization, senior or junior, but as human beings with vast experience, then we enrich the organization. We get to know more about what we already know. Again, this is played out in a really interesting way in the pandemic, which I'll share with you in a minute. Then the third one is the de-emphasis of hierarchy, and that's very simply about Your organization might have a hierarchy, but it's just making it feel like that. We're not talking about changing the organizational structure. We're not talking about changing the chain of command so much as we're talking about the way in which it feels. And so, we see organizations, for example, there's a bank in South Africa called Investec, where every single person from the CEO on down has exactly the same desk and chair. Now that means everybody's got a wonderful desk and chair, right? It means because the CEO won't sit on a bad one. But what it also means is that the normal trappings of wealth that happen, the trappings of luxury that happen as you rise up in the organization, those don't exist there. They start out at a high point and then they leave it there. So that the experience people have on a daily basis is that we're having the same experience. And it has a major impact on their ability to see leaders as people who are on the same journey as them, people who are there to assist and support, rather than people who are in charge. Now, an important thing here, of course, is that means that the openness that they create through these sorts of mechanisms, and it's not just a desk and chair, I'm sure you can understand, but the openness they create through all of that kind of stuff means that the information flows more freely. And when it flows more freely, the organization can hear more. And when it hears more, it's able to do more, adapt more, et cetera, et cetera. It gets closer to those problems. And that kind of ties into the yellow part of the Venn diagram there. Then the fourth one is respect for the two-way street. This is simply about growth. The equation will go like this. If I am better this year than I was last year, and it's because I work here, I should make a decision to stay for a while longer. Now, we can't just say growth is a lever on its own. If people are stressed out about the amount of money they're earning or the amount of leave they've got, and those are the two things that are going to be primarily on people's minds. If they're stressed out about that, then growth it becomes less important, something they don't worry about as much. But the moment you take those things off the table, and that just goes to Hertzberg's hygiene versus motivational factors. The moment you take that off the table, growth becomes a major thing. Now, the exciting part about this, and this is where it becomes something that I think we don't do enough of. We think about growth in terms of linear growth. We've got employees. How do we promote them? How do we give them more opportunities? How do we expand their area of expertise within the organization? And that's one way of looking at it. But if you're looking at it instead in terms of how do we improve our human beings, even though it doesn't directly improve the organization, but it has a knock-on effect. An example of this was an organization in South Africa where they discovered it was a car organization. They have lots of car dealerships all over the country. And they discovered that a number of their people weren't able to read or write. They weren't functionally literate. Now, this is a problem in South Africa. There's quite a lot of that. Those people weren't in admin or sales roles. They were maybe the people who washed the cars when they came out of the service. But the organization said, no, it's not right. It's not right that we've got people in our organization, and we've got a value on the wall that say that we care for our people, and we've got people who are unprotected against the world. They went out and they actively sought to teach those people, everybody who couldn't read or write, to do so. It was the company paid for it, and it happened on company time, so nobody sacrificed anything. Now, that didn't change the organization operationally, but it did change the lives of those people. And it said about the organization that we are a better group of people. It wasn't very expensive. It had a massive impact. And in doing that, they secured the loyalty of a huge number of people, those who were aided, but also those who were just proud to work for an organization like that. So we can think about this in different terms. I've never understood why it is that foreign nationals who work in the Gulf work for companies that don't teach them to speak Arabic, just as a thing. Speak, read, and write Arabic. It's a wonderful thing. It doesn't change the organization per se, but it is an important part of adapting to culture of the country that they live in. And it expands their knowledge. It emboldens them. It grows them. So these are things that I think we can think of. And then an obsession with values is the last one. Where we see organizations that are exceedingly values-led, there's a reduction in interpersonal friction in those companies. People get along better because they're less worried about you versus me. A lot of the time that we see those sorts of challenges amongst people, it's because there's a values clash. And that values clash is just something that we all know in HR, that lands on our desks, right? That's what we have to deal with. And it's nightmarish. But a codified set of core values that are real and that we believe in and that we've explained thoroughly and that people can get behind because they're relevant and they're real can have a masterful effect. So we don't talk about caring about values, we talk about obsessing about them. We think that's really rather important. So those 5 things came through, and we find that when those things are happening, organizations that do them tend to drive a much higher level of engagement. But there's a couple of rules. The first one is that you have to understand a couple of things about if we're going to adopt the leadership position to its fullest extent. The first one is that we, all of our people are contractually obligated to come to work, but nobody is contractually obligated to care. They're contractually obligated to come to work and do their jobs. They're contractually obligated to perform the tasks that we set out for them, but they are not contractually obligated to do it with a great attitude. They're not contractually obligated to bring a smile to work. They're not contractually obligated to go the extra mile, and we can't make them unless we create nanny states where we're watching their every single thing, in which case we lose the engagement factor. This great attitude is something that they get to pick every day. And so one of the things we should be doing as leaders is, rather than trying to create happy people, which I think is something that is really beyond us, we're trying to create places where happiness is possible in the first place. Okay, that's going through that Venn diagram again, looking at that. How can we advance our feeling of trust? How can we create more psychological safety around things like that? How can we listen more, learn more, involve people more, get them more involved? That has an electrifying effect on making people wake up in the morning and go, I work for a great company, I can't wait to go to work. And I'm not making that up, we've seen that happen. Guys, I have to just go out of the presentation for a second because I've got to get rid of something that's on my screen. There we go, now I can see again. Okay, that was rule one. So your people are contractually obligated to come to work and to do their jobs, but they're not contractually obligated to care about them. We have to make them care. The second one is this: on balance and over time, you deserve the people you've got. As a leader in an organization, if your people are working hard and they've got a great attitude and they're putting in the extra effort and they're innovative and they're on time and they support each other, take a bow, because that hasn't happened without your leadership. But if they come to work every day and they complain and they're lazy and they don't do their jobs and their work is sloppy and you're wondering what to do about them, I'm afraid to tell you that that's on you. As a leader, we have to put up our hands and say, we're responsible for this. Now, I say on balance and over time, because of course, if you've inherited a department of people this week, you're not really responsible for them. You're going to have to work with them. But over time, as you build your team up, the engagement of that team rests solely on the shoulders of leaders. And of course, the greater leadership of the organization. Okay. So these are some of the things that underpin our thinking. These are some of the things that underpin our research. Then we get to a pandemic. And we get to a situation where all of a sudden people are jumping out of their offices and going home to work, and in some instances, they're doing that for the long term, they're going to stay there. Now, I don't know the extent to which that happens where you are in the world. It's very much true for us here still. And so we've been doing some research specifically on this, and it's led us to this place. Now, you may recognize this. This is Sana'a in Yemen. This is well, I think it's Sana'a anyway, but it's definitely Yemen. This is this wonderful country on the Arabian Peninsula about which nobody knows anything. Now, you might know it very well. You might have been there many times. You might have friends or family there. You might know some Yemenis in your workspace. Where I am in the world, this is probably the strangest place we could think of. People can point Yemen out on a map, and they've heard of the name, but nobody's ever been there. And the reason we have this metaphor very simply is because when we think about what happened in the stages of the pandemic, and I hope this makes sense to you, because it very clearly reflects what happened in South Africa and in many other parts of the world. So perhaps it's similar for you as well. Round about March last year, about 2.5 billion branch offices opened up around the world, on people's dining room tables and at people's kitchen nooks. They opened up in people's living rooms, because we all had to get out of the offices quickly and go and work remotely. And the way we've approached this, we kind of went, well, look, you've got a laptop, it's the same software, it's the same laptop, the same colleagues, it'll be a different room with a different chair, nothing's really different, right? Except it was different. It was radically different. And the way we look at this, if you were to take the playbook from an office in Johannesburg or Los Angeles, or Sydney, or London, or maybe even Dubai, or maybe even Kuwait, and you took that playbook and said, go and open an office in Sana'a and just use this, you'd find it wouldn't work quite so well. I mean, here's what I know. I know Sana'a has bakeries and a bus service, and you can get a cell phone signal there, and there are apartments. It sounds like Johannesburg, except it isn't. in the same way that remote working sounded like working from the office, except it wasn't. And so we began to look into this. We began to look into, and we've got a whole process that we're doing. And I'm busy writing a second book at the moment called So You Opened an Office in Yemen, Now What? And this, of course, is not about Yemen at all. It's about Yemen as a metaphor for somewhere that is unusual and different. Now, because we took this approach, because we took an approach that we didn't bother to explore the place very much. We didn't bother trying to figure out how it worked or what was different about it. Or you know, we explored this really only as tourists initially. And then as we became residents, we began to get very operational about maybe getting a bit more comfortable at home with an office chair or something like that. And then as we realized we were going to stay here, we began to get a little bit more in depth about the type of software we were going to use. But we never really focused on the people aspect of it. And so our office in Yemen will never be functional. It will never be everything it could be until we deal with those things. This is what we've been dealing with largely. And there are some stories that underpin this. This has kind of been a global phenomenon of people feeling like initially euphoria, I get to work from home. No traffic in the morning, it's fantastic. I get to start work a little bit later. I don't have to dress up. I just have to put on a smart shirt. I could be wearing shorts right now. And nobody needs to care. I'm at home. I don't have to worry about what I'm going to eat for lunch later on today because I can make it at that time rather than packing it in the morning. And all of those sorts of decisions were made. And that seemed fine for a while until we began to realize that we're social creatures and we missed each other. More than that, we didn't feel that we were seen anymore. And this is the part of the employee experience. I was told a story by a lady here in South Africa who, when she worked in the office, it was common practice during her lunch hour for her to go to her child's school, pick him up from school, go into the grocery store on the way home, buy some groceries, and then drop the kid off at school and drop some groceries off, and then go back to the office. And this would normally happen during her lunch hour. Nobody cared, nobody noticed. It's her lunch hour. She's free to do what she wants with it. But now she's working from home. She's not seen on a daily basis. Nobody knows she's there or even that she's working. That's already creating a little bit of nervousness. And so she's working extra hours, working extra hard, etc. But the one day she has these weekly check-ins with her boss. That's fairly normal. That goes well. But the one day her boss phoned her ad hoc. She was in a grocery store in the middle of the day. And her boss was alarmed. He's like, why are you shopping in the middle of the day? What are you doing? Are you even working? All of this had been normal up until then, but suddenly it felt abnormal. And it felt like a betrayal of trust. And she explained herself, and it was clear to explain, but something's been missing now. Something's kind of lost in the equation. And so that was a very unsatisfactory experience for her. And many, many people have spoken about having similar sorts of things, similar sorts of challenges. And so it's been complicated. And sorry, I've got something on my screen again. Oh my goodness, this is really quite awkward. Sorry guys, I'm going to just do this one last time and remove something from my screen. I know you're recording the session, Dr. Muhammad, I apologize. But these are some of the experiences people have had. Or we've got the single mom who works from home in a one-bedroom apartment. She comes to work every day. She's on par with her peers. It all feels fairly normal. But now she's working from home and everybody's got these wonderful bookcases behind them with all of these wonderful books in their wonderful home offices, but she doesn't have that. It's fine on a Zoom call or a Teams call until one day somebody said, put your camera on, we want to see you. And she felt exposed. Or the person who just didn't really understand, you know, they started work at 8 o'clock in the morning every day, but now they're working from home. They'd usually get into the car at 7. They're not doing that anymore, so they start work at 7. Rather than using that hour to do something fun or educational or relaxing or something like that, they're just working longer and longer hours, and now they're starting to feel trapped and burnt out. And these are some of the experiences that we found have been fairly common. And a lot of the time, those organizations that did really well with that Venn diagram at the beginning, with trust and with listening and with learning from each other and with de-emphasizing hierarchy so that it's not when my boss is on, I need to be on my best behavior, but we're checking in on each other at a human level as well. Those organizations have done much better at creating culture throughout the pandemic. But here's what we're dealing with now. We've now got to try and work out, and this is part of the research that we've been doing around the office in Yemen concept. We've got to try and work out how to go forward. Because like it or leave it, we all live in Yemen now. We are all living in this remote/hybrid environment. It will come and it will go. At the moment, the wave of COVID we're dealing with turns out it's not a particularly dangerous version. And let's hope that's how it goes. but it may come back, and we don't know. We've been at this for 2 years now. All bets are off. Furthermore, we don't know what's coming next. Could this kind of thing happen again? If we are going to adapt to a working style where we're not all going to be under one roof, all under the watchful gaze of the boss, if you are a boss and you have to adapt to that, or if you're an employee and you're having to adapt to that, we've got to come up with some better answers. We've got to come up with some better answers for how we're going to do this. And I think, you know, you see there in the logo, it says a playbook exercise. We've been trying to work with organizations to help them develop a playbook for remote working. These things are not easily at hand because no two organizations are the same. We've got different operating models to one another. We've got different cultures to one another. So we can't just say, this is the way to work remotely. We have to be very specific about each organization. What does it mean for you? And how will this work for you? And I say we need to come up with some better answers. But first, I think we need to formulate some better questions, because I think the challenge is we haven't really asked them. And this is partly what we've done when we opened our initial office in Yemen, is we went, it's not that different, without realizing that it is. And so the responses that we've had haven't been different enough. So now a lot of this is going to come down to retraining managers. It's going to come down to retraining habits. It's going to come down to a lot of things. But when we think about some of the questions that we need to answer, and please understand when I put these questions up, I'm sitting on the fence here. I don't have a point of view about whether you should have an office or not. It's up to you. There are different cultures and different operating models. Each organization is different. And maybe even each department inside an organization might have a different need. So the question I think we have to ask is not why should we have an office, but what is it for? Now, this is a very interesting conversation when you start to unpack it. It's like the layers of an onion. Because when we think about offices and how they evolved, we had offices back in the day. They originated at the top floor of a factory. There was a factory underneath producing things, and the office sat on top of the factory, shuffling paper, producing invoices and order forms for the factory. And the office performed an important admin role for the factory, and that was the evolution of the traditional office. Then the factories evolved, and eventually they all moved to China, right? So now we've got these offices shuffling paper, creating order forms and issuing invoices for factories that kind of don't exist. It's a bit of an odd thing to do, but this is where we are. Then you have office parks springing up where there's lots of offices and lots of companies full of people all shuffling paper for factories that don't exist. And this becomes even more peculiar. But it's okay because we've got community, we've got all sorts of things going on. But then the cloud comes in. And with cloud computing now, just as we're doing now, I'm addressing you from South Africa. We're all over the place here. There may be people who are outside the Gulf or Egypt from all over the world on a call like this. And we're all doing this in front of our laptops because we all have the internet where we are. We have fast broadband. We have all the software we need, which means technically you're doing your job on the internet on a laptop. That's very likely that's the case. So now here's what we were doing prior to the pandemic. We were waking up in a house that has high-speed broadband, and we've got a laptop. We were getting into our car and driving to an office where we would sit down, put on our laptop, connect to the internet, and do our jobs. That doesn't seem to make a great deal of sense. Now, just if that's the reason that we've got an office, we probably ought to think through that again. Is that a good enough reason to have one? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. But then comes the pandemic, and we're no longer there. Now we're being asked to go back. And if we are going to go back, we have to establish what it's for. It can't be because that's where we work. That doesn't seem to work anymore. And I think a lot of people are going to argue with that. And when we talk about the Great Resignation, I think a lot of people are going to have a point of view about whether or not that actually makes any sense for them. Like if I have to go to an office, maybe I'd rather work somewhere else. If it is about community and about collaboration, surely every coffee shop and every park in the world is a better place to be. That may not ring true in the Gulf. I know it's very hot in summer. We all want to be inside with this air conditioning. But I just think this is one of those questions that we have to answer. We have to decide what we need it for, and then we'll decide whether or not we actually need one at all. And if we do, and you decide you do, good luck to you. God bless you. Enjoy your office. I'm sure it's the right decision for you. But this is a question we've never had to explore before because we simply had one. And this was just the way things were. Then we have to start thinking about what do we do about office hours. In a remote working environment, office hours don't start to make a lot of, they don't seem to have the same amount of sense. Sure, you've got customers who are used to your offices being open at a certain time during the day for a certain number of hours, but they're changing too. And we're all evolving. And unless you're in a retail environment or a hospital or somewhere where there have to be people on the ground at given times, office hours start to become a lot more flexible. And this becomes a real lever for attracting talented people. It also means you can start to source people all over the world because you're kind of operating on a 24-hour clock. And in this instance, what we're going to start to have to, the conversations I think we'll start having, and they're going to appear on the table with increasing frequency again and again and again, people are going to start to say, hold on now, if I'm expected to do 8 hours worth of work a day, and you don't really know when I'm working, it doesn't really matter, it doesn't impact anybody specifically if I do that between 8 and 5, surely I can put in 3 hours in the morning, take a couple of hours to go swimming or go for a run or have a snooze or do a hobby or something like that, and come back and do the rest of the hours without disrupting anybody. It makes sense, it enables a great deal of things, but it's disruptive. And this disruption is something we're going to have to try and figure out. What do we do with them? Do we say, no, our office hours are rigid? Is that actually what we need? Because if it's what we need, then it is what it is. But if it isn't, how can we do that differently? And the fear we're going to have is about a complete loss of control, right? We're going to feel like we're not actually monitoring people who are on the job anymore. How do we know if we're putting in their hours? And of course, you're right, you can't, which brings us to the third point. See, we've been used as managers to looking around the office and seeing our people and measuring part of our performance is whether or not they're there. If they're there, we know what we're going to get out of them. We can see if they're working. If they're standing around chatting, we can say, guys, come on, focus. We can do all of that kind of thing. But if we can't do that anymore, how do we make sure that what we've got is the right work? And anybody who's ever had to delegate a part of their job before will have experienced this. My work used to be in magazines. In fact, I was in Dubai for a number of years working for an organization called ITP. And there was a time when I had to replace myself as the editor of a magazine that I was in charge of and replace it with my deputy editor. Now, she was a very capable woman. She was extremely good at what she did, but I knew the way in which she worked was different to the way in which I worked, which was really kind of challenging for me. And I knew that if I was going to be prescriptive about the way in which I wanted the job done, we'd just be at loggerheads. We probably wouldn't get anywhere. And ultimately she might leave. So what I said was I set very clear objectives. And these were at the beginning of every week until I got to the point that I was just comfortable that she had what she needed. But clear objectives. What do we need to achieve this week? What do I expect from you this week? Or indeed, if that's too long, what do I expect from you today? What's the output that I will measure your performance on today? Because as we're working through a project, perhaps there are steps that have to be completed. And those steps are going to be terribly important to the success of the project. If I know that this is what I'm going to get out of you today, then I can rest comfortably. I don't really have to worry about when you do it or how you do it, as long as you get it done. It's a different style of management, but it's the only one that's really going to work in a remote or hybrid world. And this is probably going to require a whole lot of employee retraining, of management retraining, manager training. You know, our managers aren't equipped to manage in this way. That doesn't mean they're bad or that we need better managers. It just might mean we need different training now. The world has changed and they're going to have to learn how to manage under different circumstances. Then another one is where should our employees live? I mean, I had such a fascinating conversation with a company in South Africa, a credit card organization, a very big credit card division of a very big bank. And they decided they're going fully remote from now on. They've got rid of all of their offices. And I said, does that mean people can live anywhere they want to live there in South Africa? And they said, no, their jobs are in Johannesburg, which struck me as a not terribly well thought through position, because ultimately, if they don't have to be in the office, then you can actually gain a huge advantage from an engagement point of view by enabling them to live wherever they want to be. You can stipulate maybe that they have to be within a certain amount of time from the office. You have to be able to be in a meeting on an ad hoc basis because we might need you, or you need to be able to get together with people because we might need you, today at 2 o'clock. So people may need to stay within 2 or 3 hours of the office, maybe. But in South Africa, you can get a plane and no plane journey is longer than about 2 hours. Theoretically, you can go and live on our beautiful coastline and do your job, what used to be in Johannesburg. This is something that we're going to have to work out, because this is another key driver of engagement. How can we change the way we meet? Big one. We're doing a lot of this stuff on Zoom. Zoom is a big thing. It's been a wonderful enabler. Teams, maybe you use. These things have been wonderful enablers for us. They've enabled us to communicate and have this kind of this almost face-to-face type experience. Except it doesn't seem like people are enjoying this as much as they should anymore. I think people are tired. I think there is much to be said for using these communication platforms the way we used to use them when we were just, the way we used to communicate when we were just in the office. You'd walk down the passageway and you'd see somebody and you'd say, hey, I haven't seen you for a while, how's it going? Or you'd say, oh, I'm glad I bumped into you, I wanted to talk to you about something. There isn't a real reason why we can't have 3-minute chats on Zoom where we can click on and say, hey, can I chat to you for a second? But we don't use it that way. We schedule meetings, and then those meetings, which used to be an hour long in the real world, because people would be disrupted having to go to a meeting, you may as well make it worthwhile. There's no reason why meetings have to be that length at all. They could be 5 minutes long, 2 minutes long. Or how about we switch the cameras off altogether and just have phone calls the way we used to? It means that we can communicate in all the useful ways, but people don't have to be seen every day. They don't have to look at little pictures of each other every day. We've overused the tools that we've got. We've missed the point on some of these things. And I think there's some questions we need to ask about that. And then the last one, what is engagement in a new world? Now Dr. Mohammed asked me to share something with you during this presentation. He asked me to share an example of one of the tools that we've developed just to sort of help drive engagement. And there is something quite fun that we've done. We've been working very, especially since about the middle of last year, on developing games, because we felt that as a training organization, a lot of the interactions that we used to have were face-to-face, and we found them very engaging and we made them very engaging. But this isn't really happening so much on Teams anymore. It's not happening on Zoom anymore. And so how do we create things that enable that sort of engagement and create that kind of fun, but a learning experience, making it worthwhile as well? And the things we've learned are these: they have to be short. Right, no more than 2 hours, maybe 3 if they're really engaging, but like short interactions that enable people to do something and then get out. They have to be visually appealing, because if you're going to stare at a screen, we've got to be drawn in a little bit. The improper light that I'm presenting to you today on this call, that gets very tiring very quickly. I want to be engaged in something. And they have to solve a problem. People have to feel that the time spent online has been worth something. And so this is some of the things that we've learned. And I want to share a little bit about this iceberg game in particular, because I think it might actually be quite a valuable one to talk about, and maybe just give you a little bit of food for thought about some of the ways in which things can be. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to take you through this very quickly, and then we can reconvene and I'll take some questions. So this is the game called Iceberg. It's analogous to the Titanic. And it solves a simple problem. It solves the problem of helping your organization and the people in it get closer to the core values by taking them through a game where we set them up as the senior members of crew on board the Titanic with responsibility for all decision making. There's all sorts of things that they will do along the way. So they'll take polls and things like this. You can take some data as you play. But essentially, as the game goes, you'll join a ship as a blue team, yellow team, something like that. And you will be given a series of problems in each round. You can see this is round 1, solve. I'll show you round 1, share, in a moment, but there's 5 rounds in a normal game. And they'll solve a problem, which is a fundamentally unsolvable problem. And they'll have to use the core values of your organization. So the core values that are on the wall in your office, they'll have to use those to solve them. They'll go through a whole series of steps over the course of about 10 minutes in this game. So in this round. So the tools that are available, they have breakout rooms on the page, so they can actually communicate and chat and talk the problem through. And you can see how that works there. So you'll see all of your team members there, all the members of teams that are on the blue ship. And then literally, they will solve the problem. They'll tap in their response to what they think it is, and they'll enter their answer. And then they'll talk about the core values. They're represented there. They're down here in exact replica. Which ones are the most useful? And the reason we do that is because while all values are true, they're not all equally true all the time. We think of them as a bit of like a DJ's mixing desk in a nightclub. You know, depending on the track they play, they turn the bass up and they turn the treble down. They're always kind of adjusting for the track because each track is slightly different. We never turn the bass off because the track will sound terrible. We never turn the treble all the way up because it will sound terrible. But no two tracks are the same. And this enables them to kind of interact with the core values in a way that they're able to sort them in a kind of dynamic hierarchical order. You know, which ones were most valuable? These ones we found. We'll ask them why. We'll collect some other bits of data here about you solved the problem that way, but is that what the company would actually do? And then when they're done on that timed 10-minute round, they go through the door to the bridge. And this is where we get the solve, oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. This is where we get the solve round, oh, sorry, the share round. And in the share round, we then, each team takes us back and the yellow team captain will show us what they did. And then the blue team captain will show us what they did. We've just done this now so you can see, etc. And so there's that kind of facilitated conversation about the core values, how they stood up, what they meant, etc., etc. And then they'll go through the door and they'll go to the next round, and there's a different problem to solve. And this facilitated conversation enables us to talk about the core values of your organization, but in a way that is metaphorical. So we're not really talking about work. We're not really talking about our colleagues or each other. We're talking about something a bit different, but we're solving problems along the way and learning how the values work. And this is the kind of engagement tool that we found is actually quite helpful in giving people something to do. It creates that team building effect. But it also solves quite an important problem for the organization. So that's what I wanted to share, Dr. Mohammed. I'd like to hand that back to you, and maybe there's some questions or something like that might come next.
Thank you so much, Colin, for your great topic and presentation. And actually, I think it's highly needed, these days, because these days there is a lot of I'd say it's hybrid work. Still people not back to normal. We are not back to the old days, and I'm not sure whether we'll go back to the old days or not. I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either.
Sure, and I will leave the floor for any questions. If anyone has a question, please either you raise your hand and ask directly or write in the chat box as you like. But it's really amazing, and again, this one of the non-traditional presentation that we had in the past few years. I'll tell you a story about us. Even our group is voluntary group. We are here in Kuwait since 2010. We've been meeting on a monthly basis, so we have a guest and go to a hotel or someplace. We have a meeting face to face and discuss. We have presentation very nicely. And then when the pandemic hits, and I was not sure, definitely everything stopped and we're not sure what to do. But I found that many people are anxious, many people are not fine. The people, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, they were really, they don't know what to do. And again, there is no work and many things stopped. So I think, okay, why not we have our discussions online, we have meetings online, okay? I was new by that time to Zoom. I was not using Zoom. Even I was using another tool. I was not sure how to use it very well, and then tried Zoom and so on. So now people are getting more familiar. Okay. Yeah. I'm not sure. And tell me your opinion again from what you see.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll ask also people with us to share with us. Do you think people are? Do you want to go back to offices, or they like to stay on Zoom, or it will be 50-50? What do you think? Let me have your opinion, and also let people write in the chat for us.
I'd love to hear some opinions as well. I mean, I think it's going to be a mixed bag. I really do. I think there are going to be some organizations where I already know people are. I know some people are itching to get back. They don't like working from home. They don't like the. I mean, maybe their homes aren't set up for it, and it's just an uncomfortable place to be, and they kind of miss the office. When we've done workshops using the Yemen metaphor, the one thing we found is that nobody misses driving to work, right? Nobody misses traffic. But I think the thing is, I think people could enjoy it more, and I think they would enjoy it more dealt with some of the, came up with some better questions and answered them and came up with some better answers. I think the pressure of being on Zoom all day long, people haven't enjoyed that. I think that's been very difficult for people and a very sort of substandard experience. But I think that those are things we can fix. And I think that, it's now time for us to stop thinking like tourists, where we're just in Yemen, just seeing the sights, but never tasting some of the food. We come home and people say, "Oh, you went to Yemen? What was it?" And you stayed at the Hilton, and you ate at McDonald's. And I mean, I don't know. It's like, did you really see Yemen? You don't know anything about it. You just happened to go there. And I think we have to get away from that to where we settle in and we actually explore the place properly and work out how to really enjoy ourselves here. And I think this is probably going to be a process of the next 3 to 5 years before we've really sorted this out.
Yes, you're right. Actually, I was lucky enough to be in Yemen. So I went to Yemen in year 2000. Okay, and it is really great place. And I was really above my imagination. And even I traveled inside Yemen to other places, to Aden, and also take a trip with four-wheel drive car. We go over the mountain. It's really great place, very nice people, very beautiful places, and it's really a great and amazing experience.
I'm exceedingly jealous. I would love to do that.
Yes, sure. And I think actually, as you said, sometimes I feel, okay, I want to be back to the office, meet the people, just realize, and so on. But other times, as I said, it's very hard to drive, okay, in the crowded time. And maybe you need some flexibility, some freedom. Okay, I think it just differs from one place to another and from job to another. But again, we cannot go back to what we used to do, but will be new normal.
But I think the thing is, it's going to be different for every single organization. And I think this is where we start talking about best practice, for example. I don't think there is one, not one that is true for everybody. Each organization is going to be different. What GlaxoSmithKline does is going to be very different to what Kuwait Airlines does. They're just not going to be the same. They can't be the same. And this is why I think organizations need to get really, really clear about understanding the dynamics of what's been going wrong, what people have liked, what they haven't liked. And I think the important thing about this is those answers do not live in the heads of the organizational leaders. They live in the heads of the men and women who've been doing it. Company after company told me at the end of 2020 that we had our best year yet. And I said to them, that's cool, and I'm glad to hear it worked. But you have to ask, did that best year come at the heads and hands of people who put in 17-hour days? Because if that's what happened, then it's a Pyrrhic victory. It came at too high a cost, and it's not sustainable. You can't do that again and again and again. Like if that's what happened, and I think in very many instances, it's not what we did and what we said, it's what we didn't do and didn't say. No CEO ever stood up and said, guys, listen, I don't want anybody to send an email after 5 p.m. on a Friday. I'm not going to do it, and I don't want you to do it. No supervisor ever said, you know what, work starts at 8. I don't want to see you online before then. So you used to get into the car at 7 and drive to the office. Take that hour now, go for a run, read a book, have a long bubble bath, do something, whatever, but use the time. Instead, people just logged on earlier and stayed on later and later, and nobody ever told them not to. And I think we assume that people will just act, like grown-ups and make decisions, but they won't. We've seen that they won't. They're waiting for permission, and we need to give them permission. We need to do these things.
Yes. I have a question here. I've been thinking about, in very hard times like that we have been through and we're still going through, who cares about culture?
Well, do you know what I think? I think culture is held up rather well. I think if we understand what culture actually is, culture being, the loose definition that it's the way we do things here, right? So the go-to positions. I think because there hasn't been that daily guidance, because people have been forced to kind of think for themselves and they've been afraid and fearful and a bit dislocated, they've kind of made the absolutely traditional decisions which speak to culture. So the way we escalate things, the way we monitor things, the way we report on things, all of these sorts of things, I think the go-to positions have held up rather well. I don't think that's been the problem. I think what we've seen is that it's not actually culture that is deficient. It's the relationship between leaders and employees, which we haven't explored fully enough. That's what's changed, and that's been where we've fallen down here a little bit. It's actually been a relationship and a leadership methodology issue, and I think that's where we've really forgotten. We do have a comment here, Dr. Mohammed, from Muzaffar, saying, yes, companies forgot people. People are focused on the bottom lines, and I think that's true, and I think that's one of the things that we need to fix. We fixed a lot of the things that we knew how to fix. Companies, by and large, they realized that working from home was going to be inefficient, and so they got in touch with the efficiencies from an operational standpoint. They got like care packages out to people which had a laptop stand, and they allowed people to go into the office and take their office chair. They made sure people had access to data. They did those sorts of things. They gave them the tools. From an operational point of view, we did the things that we needed to do. But from an emotional, spiritual, people point of view, we just didn't get there. And I don't think it's negligence, and I don't think it's evil. I think we just don't know how. We actually just don't know what's required. We haven't explored it, and we still don't know. And it's 2 years later, and we still don't know. And so all the things that people are going through, all the challenges that people have got, we don't even know what they are. That's why I say we need better questions before we can answer them. And we need to do more listening. We need to enable the people who are working from home. We need a mechanism to listen to them, to hear what they've got to say, so that we can go, well, hold on, like 50% of our people are saying this is wrong, this thing that they don't like. We can fix that. We can do something about it. And in one fell swoop, we can really improve the experience that people have. But we don't know what they are, so because we haven't bothered to ask.
Yes, but shouldn't this start with top management first, awareness that they need to know that people engagement is important, providing the right culture and so on. So start from the top, okay, and then it goes the right direction.
I think it might inevitably cascade. I mean, this has often been true. We've always had the point of view that we get asked to do behavior change programs and things like that. And my response has always been, it's a very simple one. If I'm going to embark on a behavior change program, I'm going to do it with the top 7 people in your organization and nobody else. Because if you've got a behavior problem in your organization and it doesn't change at the top, it won't change anywhere.
Yes. The
bottom line is those people have influence and impact, and people watch them and they listen to them and they learn from them. And we've seen, we did a very interesting behavior change program with a platinum mining organization in South Africa, where we only work with the senior leadership team. And we got them into a kind of a servant leader type relationship, where they did more on the spot coaching, more listening, and so on. And by changing that began to cascade down to their line managers, which cascaded down. It takes time, but we've seen the impact of that over a couple of years. And we're seeing it now very clearly. But if you start in the middle, I mean, there's just really no point. You might change things for a brief period of time, but it won't stand. It won't stay.
Okay. We have many people here from the HR function. So they are either leading HR, working in HR, or previously worked as HR or consultants in HR. So what's your advice to them, okay, regarding building the right culture in this new hybrid world?
So I think in this instance, again, if we look at the reality, which is that we don't really have the answers, HR is in a unique position, and it usually is in a unique position to have that kind of people information. People in HR are probably having more conversations with people than anybody in the organization, and you're probably more in touch with what the organization is feeling, what the people in the organization are feeling. You're also probably closer to the rules, the policies, the process, maybe not some of the work processes, but the policies at least, in a better way to understand how those, the ones that are outdated and the ones that are being habitually enforced, but may not make any sense anymore, you're in a better position to start that conversation. The role of HR has long been a much more strategic one than it's set up to be. It's not perceived as strategic very often, but it absolutely is. One cannot achieve anything over the long term with any organization, no matter what it is, without people being on board. And that people engagement aspect falls right at the heart of HR. So I would say to our colleagues in HR, kickstart this conversation inside your organizations, lead the conversation. The conversation must go something along the lines of, we know what we're doing. Let's just be clear about one thing. Working from an office was inefficient, right? It wasn't perfect either. This is inefficient, working remotely and hybrid. It's not perfect, but it never was perfect. It was always a bit of a workaround. So there's always been some of these challenges, but you've been able to overlook them before because it's the way things were. Now it's a brave new world, and you lead the conversation where you say, look, here's what we know from our people. Here's what we know they're telling us, perhaps through some surveys or whatever it is that you're doing. Here's what we think we need to do in order to address this. And the big topics, and there's big topics, right? Things like working hours, things like working policies, things like meeting protocols, things like and when I talk about working hours, by the way, I didn't mean in terms of do we work in the early hours of the morning because I'm a bit of a late night owl. I don't mean that. I mean, you've set working hours for people, which might be 8 hours a day. If they're working 15, that falls in your domain. You've got to say to lead the conversation inside the organization to say, this is what's going on. It's not what people have signed up for. We need to stop this. And I think there's a real influential role that HR can play in the new world. And I think, guys, in case you're thinking, well, it's a little bit late, the horse has bolted, it hasn't. We're going to be figuring this out for the next 3 to 5 years. And there's every opportunity for any HR manager to be an absolute thought leader on this topic in a very short period of time.
Yes, okay, good. Thank you so much for this great presentation and discussion. I'd say if anyone has question, Mr. Karen. Normally people are not that calm, but I'm quiet. So that's great. My last question regarding the games that you're talking about, the games online games that you do on training. How do you feel? How do you find the people engagement? Because we know that people, again, they don't really put attention in training on online training and things like this. How do you find people engagement and also interested in the online games?
So what we found very simply is we set these things up properly. So it's in advance of the game. There's a whole bunch of information that goes out, and for example, we'll send them an induction pack to the Titanic as an officer. So there's something entertaining, but we've set them up with that a little bit. Then during the course of the game, it's about leading a lively, facilitated conversation. But it's aided by, and I can't overstate this, it's aided by beautiful visuals. I don't know if you felt my game was beautiful, but we worked very hard to make it look beautiful. And that's not just vanity. It's really important that people have something interesting to see. We've also, we think that working in teams and then creating that metaphor, that make-believe, that fun factor is really quite important, but also being able to get them in and out, right? So a game of Iceberg will probably take about 2.5 hours. It's a relatively long period of time to be online, but it's a short period of time for an active workshop. We find that, if you're going to try and keep people online for a day, you're going to lose them. So you've got to try and keep that tempo up a little bit as well. But actually, it's a fun way for people to see each other in a different context, yes, and to work on something different that they've never done before, and to be challenged. And yeah, we found the uptake's been really good. Actually, it's changed our business from being a traditional consulting firm to having a real eye on games development in a virtual world. Because that's actually the way we see the opportunity.
Yes, that's very interesting. I always used to like games in the classroom, and I believe it's a very good tool for people development and learning. And now when you see it in the virtual life, I think it's gaining more momentum, and I think it's creating more interest. Right. So hopefully we can have another session with you regarding the games as well.
It's nothing but a pleasure. I've got a very great love for your part of the world. I spent 6 wonderful years in Dubai, from 96 till 2002. So it wasn't what Dubai is. I've never seen modern Dubai, but when I was there, you'll have known what Dubai was like back in the mid 90s. And I loved it out there. I absolutely loved it. I loved the people. I loved the culture. It's wonderful to be able to share with you guys. So thank you very much for making it.
Great. So thank you so much, Mr. Colin, for this great presentation and for the discussion. It was really our great pleasure to have you with us today, and we're looking forward to keep in touch with you and also have you with us again soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well done.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.